So if you guys have any question for anyone else here in the group, feel free to stand up, come up to the podium and ask anyone specifically, and I think that will just get the ball rolling. So the first question to knock this out is, for you individually, what is the Nakamoto consensus? And how do you see each of the main chains of Bitcoin reflecting that? Or what do you perceive the Nakamoto consensus to be within each chain?
I might go first because I'll definitely be short on this. I think the Nakamoto consensus is really for me, I understand it like a European constitution. It's a set of fixed rules that people put in place, and then they see what happens. And if they don't like it, they go off to some other space, and they do a new set of rules. And it seems to me that the best thing, a la Daniel, is to remain agnostic to the end and observe all. But I'm not speaking for Daniel. That's my opinion. I'm going to give it to Paul.
Okay.
Or not.
That's only the best thing if you don't know who's going to win. Nakamoto consensus is based on the fact that you cannot consistently spend energy if you don't know what genuinely creates the greatest future opportunity.
Yeah, I mostly agree with that. That's fine. I mean, it's this Nakamoto consensus is this idea invented by Satoshi, and it involves all this data being transmitted over a network, but it's organized into headers, and the headers have these hashes on them, which are difficult to forge without wasting a lot of money. And so they're easy to construct because you get paid in Bitcoin for constructing them. So you can kind of construct them for free, but attacking is expensive. That's kind of clever.
Yeah, I guess from a technical perspective, you've got these miners engage in something called proof of work. They grind away mining Bitcoin, and then when you're confronted with two conflicting chains or two conflicting forks, there's a longest chain rule or most work chain rule where you're supposed to select the chain that has the most amount of accumulated work and the one that has where the entire work is covering valid consensus rules, so where the chain is valid according to the set of agreed upon consensus rules. And it's the idea that if everyone's following that rule, you can be pretty sure that if you build a block on the chain that follows that rules, that other people will build on top of your block, so you're trying to get your block included in the chain that you think everyone else is going to include it in.
All right, you stole half of what I was going to say. That's the technical explanation. So the only thing I'll add to that is I'd say that it is a really good incentive model, right, that makes that structure work. It creates that whole economic system that makes it all work with the whole upfront costs of the mining and the computers and the equipment, et cetera. So solid incentive model.
Thank you. Okay, does anyone have any questions regarding the Nakamoto consensus? Yes. I'll reiterate your question. It's okay. Yeah.
What you're trying to say is involving robust way of solving the double spend problem.
He's asking if this is a robust way of solving the double spending problem.
Well, it solves the Byzantine generals problem more generally. So double spending is a subset of the Byzantine generals problem, but potentially anything that everybody would want to form a consensus on we can use the Bitcoin Nakamoto consensus system to arrive at it.
I would say also that I think it's when we talk about Nakamoto consensus, we talk about what it is itself, but then it also has certain implications depending on what you decide it is. So I think it is a lot of other kind of secondary discussions. So at its heart, it's a technical solution, but by definition, that has certain philosophical implications, and how you then interpret those is why we have such a richness and diversity of beliefs in the space.
Okay, so next question. Is there a more reliable way of achieving consensus than proof of work?
No.
Well, if you're referring to things like proof of stake, and then the answer is no so far. I mean, no one has even come close.
What about within Bitcoin itself?
I don't understand. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so your answer is no. Okay, is there a more reliable way of achieving consensus? So to change the rules of software is a proposal, right?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point that I presented actually on this exact topic at Lisbon at Building on Bitcoin, which is that there's no proof of work works for consensus, but it does not do anything for meta consensus, which is what should we have consensus on?
Right.
And so it only hits one level down from wherever you are standing. You need some other thing to get that other layer.
I would
I'm
like for
going
you
to
to
call
elaborate more on that.
philosophy meta-consensus from now on. Metaphysics is meta-consensus, so I'm with that.
Yeah, I mean, on the previous question, I think proof of work is what was the term, the best thing going right now?
To change the rules of the software is a proposal, correct?
Previous question.
Is there a more reliable way of
More
achieving
reliable.
consensus?
So, I mean, proof of work has been the most reliable thing we have so far. I don't know if that's going to be the case for all time, though. There's a lot of research going on into other consensus algorithms, and there's a lot of downsides to proof of work, too. I mean, it's not, my talk was about, 51% attack being launched against Bitcoin Cash. That's one of the big downsides is this giant vulnerability, energy consumption, other sort of stuff that have incentivized research into alternatives. And I don't think we found a kind of bulletproof alternative yet, but we might, I don't know.
There shouldn't be a meta consensus. Just if you're using proof of work, then you can have a consensus. So no meta consensus.
Although I would interject and say, look, I have this sense that you don't blockchain and proof of work everything. Maybe you don't proof of work things that are not particularly vulnerable to censorship, that perhaps shouldn't be in this ecosystem in the first place. And so to a certain extent, I think we have to differentiate between information that we really want to protect and information that's less important to protect. And I think that other algorithms or either other concepts, a lot of the stuff that people are experimenting with, proof of stake, is a kind of recycled, and that's no disrespect, it makes me trust it, recycled set of sort of principles that are appropriate to perhaps not your ID and not your money and not your DNA, for which you want a whole truckload of money to have to attack and screw with.
So I like the idea of proof of stake, which I think is probably the biggest competitor to proof of work. I think it's just not really well tested enough yet. I'm excited for and scared for Ethereum to test that out, because I think that'll probably be the biggest test of it thus far. But one thing that's really interesting to me is coming back to incentives. Is there this idea with proof of work, you have external incentives, right? And in proof of stake, they're more internal. And that changes it a little bit. And I'm not quite sure how that's going to affect things, but it'll be, when you change that incentive structures, you could get very different outcomes. So it'll be a very, very interesting experiment.
Anybody who goes into a proof of stake coin will be driven insane eventually, because anything that's pretending not to be proof of work is just a fustigated proof of work, and the work function in a proof of stake coin is the people's thoughts, and that's going to drive them crazy, because and you need to read Paul's article on proof of stake, because he was very prescient in his description of what happens in a proof of stake coin, and he thought he was inventing a thought experiment about a TV show, but the stuff that he talks about is really what will really happen to people in a proof of stake coin. So stay away from them, because you will really be driven insane the longer you stay in the coin.
Yay, Daniel. And insanity has a lot to be said for it, just by way of performance art, if you're the spectator. I would argue, and this is maybe just parsing the words, is that the problem is not with the proof of stake, it's with the idea of coin. And I would suggest that one of the things that we may see iterate out is a more sophisticated idea of what, and I'm not talking about the SEC and markets and how you gamble and make money, but I am talking about the fact that things that function the way we think of coins, to me, are the things that are really the important censorship vulnerable things in our world, right? Our money, our ID. But there are all kinds of things where I think the different internal incentive and structure, if you're trying to fit, I don't know, a hand into a shoe, you are going to go nuts. But if you realize that in fact you need a glove and the world can handle shoes and gloves, you're in good form.
Yeah, proof of stake is a hard no from me, and the people who have been advocating it have said that it's 3 months away for the last like 7 years, and so it's just a new group of suckers come in who believe that it's around the corner. I'm sorry to say that's just my view on after listening to people talk about this for so long, so long.
Right, like that it will happen someday.
It's not cheaper than proof of work. It's just a crazy other proof of work that involves like denial of service attacks and simulating millions and millions of blockchain forks at the same time. So
I'm only arguing that it may be far more appropriate to certain activities and groups, and therefore, yay, right? You may just want to keep that separate from.
yeah, I completely agree. There are different. Well, that's kind of the thing is that about meta consensus, which is that maybe there shouldn't be one, but the point is that in our reality, there either is one or there is not, and there happens to not be one right now. So it's like, should there be one or not? But right now, people disagree over what the rules should be. But part of that disagreement is what should we be having consensus about, and do we need proof of work for medical records and et cetera, et cetera.
Right, or social media standing.
Anything else?
Well, to respond to you, Christina, proof of stake is not good for anything. But if you need a consensus, you should use proof of work. But there are all kinds of things that you don't need a consensus for, and then you don't really need a blockchain for them.
I completely agree with the idea that proof of stake may be a very interesting concept to apply to things where you don't need a consensus, where in fact what you might need is to continue to stay in the discussion. And I absolutely agree that the application of blockchains should be carefully and specifically applied.
Okay, so let's press. Okay, you have a question? Go for it.
I do not.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, he wants to know if you could reach finality by having a mix of proof of work and proof of stake, kind of like Ethereum is doing right now? Okay. Decred, right? Decred is, they champion their governance model, right? So what do you think?
I don't know how. Go.
Yeah, absolutely not. It would just be mixing one thing that's clearly proof of work with something that is just a very confused version of proof of work, and you'll just have a mixture of one thing that does proof of work explicitly and one thing that does proof of work in a confusing way, and the result will just be a blended proof of work that is half confusing and half explicit. So we'll in practice achieve nothing, I think.
So I think the answer is probably yes. I probably disagree with Paul there. So like one of the things I've worked on recently is writing for Bitcoin Cash a proof of concept of something called Avalanche. Avalanche is a alternative consensus mechanism. It's not Nakamoto consensus, it's Avalanche consensus. But Avalanche needs like an anti-Sybil mechanism, which could be stake coins. So it's not proof of stake in the way that proof of stake coins use it, but it's using, or it could use coins. So I mean, we haven't figured out the anti-Sybil mechanism in the Bitcoin Cash case yet. We might use past blocks mined by miners. We could use Coinbase rewards. We could use Coinage. We could use stake coins. But so the idea there is to create finality nearly instantaneously. So this proof of concept that I wrote, we finalized transactions in Avalanche and Bitcoin Cash in 2 seconds. So you think of like today going into a store and it's unconfirmed for 10 minutes, and even long after 10 minutes, it's confirmed. You still have to wait maybe 6 confirmations, 10 confirmations, or whatever. Like we can potentially, the promise is to potentially do that in like 2 seconds. And that's kind of one of the things I'm working on, and we're hoping to see get into Bitcoin Cash later on. We'll see.
Okay, you don't need that at all. In a small world network, the dominant strategy is to transmit information honestly. If the number of links between 2 different nodes is 3 or less, so when you send a transaction out into the Bitcoin network, it is already it's already good enough to be treated as a payment because it's been seen by the miners, and they all know when they saw it first and which one they saw first. So none of the stuff that he's talking about is needed at all.
But I would argue, right, that the Bitcoin universe doesn't exist in isolation, and we don't yet live in a place where the Bitcoin network doesn't want to have to interact with other networks. So when I'm listening, and I do this, as you know, right, I sort of translate stuff metaphorically, and I listen to the idea of DACRED or something blended, and I think, different bodies of legislation, different types of groups with different kinds of mandates, right? So I guess my question, right, is do you think that there are not kind of messier and almost by definition, not small world for larger?
If you want to ask a question, come up here so that we know explicitly that you're asking a question to one of the panel discussions.
Daniel.
Okay.
Annie, do you want to go? You can answer that. Daniel.
Well, I didn't get the end of the question, so.
We can do it later.
Okay, so I guess to Daniel's, I don't believe what Daniel said for a minute. This has been long known in Bitcoin going back almost to the beginning that unconfirmed transactions are pretty trivially double spent. You can do this. You can write you can write code that can double spend it pretty easily. And we've even seen like Peter Risen ran probably what is the largest scale test on Bitcoin Cash to see the viability of this. And the double spends succeed, I forget what the numbers were, but like 20-30% of the time, something like this. One of the main issues, block propagation, regardless of what the network topology looks like, is irrelevant to the question of minor bribes. So like one can imagine going into a store and you buy a television for $2,000 and you broadcast a transaction that pays $1,000 to the miner and then $1,000 back to yourself. So now the miner has, if he mines your double spend, he gets $1,000 and you get a $1,000 discount. This is a big bribe. You can easily do this. And it's something like, on the Bitcoin Cash network, it was something like 15% of miners were accepting bribes, for even small amounts, for like cups of coffee amounts. You start adding $1,000 bribes, $2,000 bribes to your transaction, they're going to go through. And empirically, they're going through. This is not fantasy. This is the actual research shows that these double spends will go through, which is why we're doing things, experimenting with things like Avalanche, is to make it so that these double spends don't go through at all.
It's irrational for miners to accept double spends because it's bad for business and they can all see that it happened. And if you don't trust that the miners are pursuing profits, that they're pursuing their best interest by managing the network, then you will inherently destroy the network.
I mean, you can say it's irrational, but they're doing it empirically. So, I guess we can just say, well, 15% of the miners are irrational because that's empirically what's happening.
I think there's no reason to suggest that, people should not use ZeroConf, and in the future they won't need to. Anything purchased online, in 10 minutes, if it's double spent, you can just cancel the order, like from Amazon or something. In a store, people could buy gift cards in advance. And so it's totally possible to have a future where Bitcoin is used to buy every single thing, every single cup of coffee. Even now, I was in a coffee shop or something, bagel shop, and they have you can get a discount if you pay in advance. So they're all trying to get out of the credit card payment. So if you want to live in this world where Bitcoin is used for every transaction, you don't have to be in a world where ZeroConf works, which is fortunate because ZeroConf cannot work, and I hate to play like a really weird, pretentious physics card, but there is no like first transaction until the block is found, because the two transactions can be broadcast around the world in different directions, and so there'll be a different first for different nodes that receive it, and this is just basic Einstein physics. And again, I realize it's pretentious to just cavalierly jump into the physics world for some reason, but there is no such thing as a first transaction. So it's just, this is an entirely nonsense conversation, and zero-conf is not secure, and there's tons of ways of doing fast payments, even instant payments, that do not rely on zero-conf, which is exactly what should and probably will happen. And furthermore, in reality, probably no one will try this double spend, because most people are just honest people who just want to buy a cup of coffee, and they're just honest people. So although there are dishonest people out there, it's mostly, this whole conversation is inane to me, I'm sorry to say.
So I have sort of a meta comment to all of this. I think we all need to, like, we like to argue about these sort of things, and this one's going to be winner, and that one's going to be winner, like there's going to be one coin to rule them all. And I do think that Bitcoin will be the dominant player, but we have to remember this is all a really grand experiment. So it's fantastic that you're working on Avalanche, and it's fantastic that we have all these different branches and experimentation. And even if we like to think there's going to be one coin that will rule them all, but we have to think we're looking at that from an old model where there's giant switching costs between different currencies. And in this new world, there won't be, right? There'll be much, much lower switching costs between different currencies. So I really hope we're going to see a really, really, robust ecosystem with all different kinds of options and experimentations, and we'll find out what works and what doesn't.
Profit seeking in one unit is the only alternative to central planning and the chaos of socialism.
What now?
That's what I was talking about in my talk. One unit. Profit seek in one unit. That's the only alternative to central planning.
Why one unit? You're talking about a psychologically unit of account?
No, I think I'm just going to say, because I've listened to a lot of your stuff, Daniel, like even outside this room, so forgive me, I'm going to go with my talk to Daniel on this point, right? But if you're going to talk about it from an investment point of view, and you're talking about actually taking your units of value and making a bet, then I agree with you. But I don't think that the world is only that, right? And I think there's a cross purpose here, because you can't say that there aren't spaces and ways of making bets that don't involve what you think of as value transfer units.
One unit means that all economic activity throughout the economy can be compared in terms of opportunity cost. And 2 units means that it can't.
I really think that when you have a currency unit, and we see this in the analog world, right, that bridges many, many differences, like the US fiat dollar, you actually call into being central planning, or you call into being the thing that you're calling socialism. Because a dollar in Mississippi is different from a dollar in New York, even though they function in the same way. So just intellectually, I think the monocoin system doesn't necessarily have all of the implications you think it does.
Well, you're right about the dollar being different in different locations, but the way that we use money means that there's an incentive for everybody to transmit reliable information, right? So if there is a big disparity in how dollars are used in one location and another, that creates the economic incentive to close that disparity.
But you can't historically suddenly make Mississippi the inheritor of the Northern Industrial Revolution and demographics different for 100 years. And I would posit that in the analog world, we're still going to have things that need to bridge some of those differences. If we want to have single units, I would argue this is the primary case in the European Union, which doesn't do the kind of redistributive so that a euro means the same everywhere. But I'm going to just stop talking now.
Okay, I don't know what any of that has to do with anything. This is just pure economics. Sorry.
Okay, so Bitcoin.
I am talking pure economics, but we can go outside.
Well, Bitcoin can transfer within an analog world, correct? Yeah. Now let's talk about that. Let's hash on this a little more, right? Okay. So, pardon me. So Bitcoin we can transact Bitcoin through our analog systems, correct? Right? It's possible, right?
Yeah, MasterCard is all set up to do that. I'm not an advocate of
Right, so we can still transfer Bitcoin within analog means of communications, correct? So therefore, we could still use the same unit of account. I'm just asking questions. Okay, so sure, ask a question, please. Well, yeah, let me hit on that some more since Chris brought up Avalanche. Sure, yeah.
So I was curious what the panel thinks of. There's a lot of actors out there that have projects and are vehement that proof of stake can be a viable solution. And most of us aren't blockchain engineers or programming engineers, so a lot of what you're saying is in that engineering capacity. What does the panel think about the idea of using proof of stake as not necessarily a displacement of proof of work, but maybe as a short circuit or a transactional optimization, if you will?
No, don't use it for anything.
So the question was,
The question was, can we use proof of stake for something else that's not like Nakamoto consensus? And I don't know. I think it depends. The sense in which whenever the answer to that question is yes, I think it would be a little misleading to refer to it as proof of stake, because proof of stake has so much baggage. It's being associated with being an alternative to proof of work for so long that I think it just becomes misleading. So even though I think you're right that, having some kind of coin voting thing, could that have applications? I think absolutely. But are we going to call it proof of stake? I think it would just be confusing for people. But yeah, I think if you get it far away from proof of work, then sure.
There are a lot of projects. Most of it's probably, nothing's going to come of 98% of it. But there are some projects, like you look at Ethereum, they've got some really smart people working on the problem, people who I'm pretty sure are a lot smarter than me, and I wouldn't discount that they're going to be able to solve it, right? I just wouldn't go Daniel's route and say it'll never happen. These are engineering problems, and there's potentially engineering solutions.
Nobody intelligent would choose to work on Ethereum.
There are a lot of type of human beings. The non-intelligent definitely have rights, and they're very interesting also.
Yeah, Ethereum is kind of ridiculous in my opinion, so I feel the same way as Daniel.
so Paul here, since you're talking about it, you wrote a great article on it was 2014 on Augur. Augur.
I did, yes.
Yes, and it's called The Truth About Augur. He created decentralized prediction markets.
It's called The Case Against Augur.
Case Against Augur.
See, the thing is, I don't really want to. I'm happy that Augur existed, and in fact, it was my original plan when I wrote that paper to hand it off to a bunch of kids from Silicon Valley who would do all the hard work while I did nothing, and then I had no legal liability either. So that was my plan from the beginning. But they just didn't really do a very good job, and they were doing this big crowd sale, and they were going to raise a bunch of money for people, and people kept asking me about it. So I wrote down all the true things that I knew about how they didn't really know what they were doing, and I put them all in an article called "The Case Against Augur," which you can find if you Google Augur. I think it's still very high up in the thing. Google's, but again, this is not some kind of. It's often misrepresented as a kind of bitterness or some kind of war or something. I'm actually happy to have spawned all the projects like I mentioned in my slide. I think that's great, and I really would actually prefer not to be working on, even though I love this idea, the decentralized prediction markets idea, even though I love it a lot. I would really rather be a user, or even better, just an observer. I used to really like going to intrade.com and just looking at the prices. I wouldn't trade, and I wouldn't want to work at Intrade. I would love to work at Intrade. Unfortunately, a million horrible things happened to the company, and it torpedoed and exploded. Some of those were related to government oppression, so that kind of started me on the track to becoming super libertarian. So that's kind of an interesting story in itself. But I'm not actually. I'm kind of happy that Augur is around, but it is. I think it is hopeless. Everything on Ethereum is doomed. I think you can't even run a node. No one can figure out how to keep it stable. You have to pay all these gas costs. In a sidechain model, there's no gas costs at all because you don't have to worry about interference across contracts. And also, not only do you have to not worry about it, but it's free. In Ethereum, you can have contracts that, when they run correctly, attack other contracts and screw them up. So it's a little bit too open-ended, and it's not managed. I gave a long series of talks called Sidechain Privatization, where I talk about why you actually want the miners to add contracts slowly, like by topic. And I say we want a contract for betting, we want something for names, we want something for assets, we want something for payments. And you don't want to just do what Vitalik did, which is just open this Pandora's box of pseudo-Turing completeness. That's a whole nother concept. But yeah, so that basically I did write this post, but yeah, anyone can read it, and I think it, there's a bunch of videos on there where they admit that all of this stuff was my idea, and they're just trying to kind of vaguely complete it by working from the paper, but not really doing it very well. And so there's all this stuff in there. You can look at that if you want, but I am actually happy that many people are trying this thing, and in fact, they have done a lot of marketing, which will kind of, I think, make it a little bit easier in general. So I think anything that advances the cause of this prediction market concept is something that I support.
Okay, so I'm gonna bring Hannah into here because Hannah tends to be partial to BTC and the Lightning Network. And so let's go back in history a little bit. And so, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember Vitalik wanted to do his smart contract platform on Ethereum. Blockstream came in, and Blockstream sold to investors that they wanted to create side chains, and what they ended up delivering was Liquid, and Liquid is not really the side chain that we expected. To be completely honest, we didn't expect it to be it became, in my perspective, it became almost as a proof of stake model for exchanges and financial institutions. So Paul wanted.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about that.
Yeah. So so my question here is, and I want to please say as much as you want about that topic, but I'm going to add a question to this, and the question is, Chris, Hannah, and Daniel, you both represent each sibling chain of Bitcoin per se of this Genesis block. So what would you see as the future of scaling within each of your chains? And Paul, if you could just please then comment on what their perspective is. And I want to know if you guys maybe see any collaborative effort between drive chains, side chains, in scaling Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, and Bitcoin BTC.
All right. I have the microphone, so I'll go first. I could talk about this for 20 minutes. There's so many things
Go
to
for
say.
it. We have time, guys. We're going through lunch, by the way. Because this is very important. This is at the heart of everything. So we're here to talk till they literally kick us out. Okay? No, seriously. We're here to talk. We're going to hash this out tonight. Okay? Go for it.
All right, so let's start with sometimes these debates, right, get dragged down into there was censorship somewhere, this person did that bad thing, I don't like so-and-so. And I want to not talk about any of that and talk about the structure of how this is going to look. I'm, work with tech, so I think about this from a technological structure, right? And you can say, oh, someone from Bitcoin Core did this awful thing and right, I don't like all of them either, right? But I want to think about, I'm thinking about what I envision being the best technical route forward, right? And I also think about 10, 20 years, 30 years in the future. So this is what I'm aiming at. So we can talk about, December 2017 when the fees on the network went crazy and everyone was mad, why don't we up the block size? And you're like, sure, that would solve that problem right then. But what I'm more concerned about is solving that problem 20, 30 years from now, right? So that's where I'm going with all of this. I am a huge fan of layers, right? Having one primary layer and having a second layer. I am not a fan of a lot of the core people that are oh, we just want this reserve currency and this, settlement sort of thing. I'm all into the e-commerce. I absolutely want that to happen. So that's my goal for all of this. My argument here is I think space in a public blockchain is a scarce and valuable resource and should be expensive. And that's why I want that second layer, which is very, very inexpensive, right? So this is how I see that playing out. We can go back and forth. I did a little prep today. I read that article you sent me like a year ago on your problems with the Lightning Network, so we can get into all of that. But I think this has I see this as having the best chance of achieving that scenario where we can keep decentralization, which is hugely important. And that balance of power in blockchains is the only way that it can function and continue to function. So keeping that decentralization while still having that very, very cheap e-commerce utility. That's the way I see this best achieved, which is why I'm a huge fan of it. But I'll let them go along, and then we can argue.
Yeah, so I'm kind of in the middle here, so figuratively and literally. So to a large extent, I do agree with the Bitcoin Core folks that Bitcoin has scaling challenges, and that if you just try to blow out the scale of Bitcoin without making any changes at all, it would create pretty extreme centralization pressure, which is this plan, right? The BSV plan is just blow it out without any changes, and just let's hope that it doesn't result in 1 or 2 people mining everything and 1 or 2 nodes on the network. So the Bitcoin Cash view of this, I think, and kind of my view is, I'm happy to watch the development of Lightning Network and see how it goes. My instinct kind of tells me that there's probably a trade-off in the Lightning Network between reliability and centralization, that the more centralized you make it, the more reliable it'll be. The more decentralized you try and make it, the less reliable it'll be. I could be wrong on that, but I think that that's kind of likely to be the case. There are other ways of doing off-chain where you have like a custodial model, which is, of course, like even more centralized. It even loses a lot of properties. So I think the view of many people on Bitcoin Cash is that Bitcoin, the base layer, the blockchain, has a lot of properties that we like that we potentially will lose if we go to these second layer type solutions. And so if we can figure out technical solutions to the scaling challenges and scaling problems that are raised by Bitcoin Core and other people, that we can maybe keep these properties that we like and continue to scale on chain. So there's, the state of where Bitcoin Cash is today is it probably can handle maybe about like PayPal scale volume, but not much more. With some changes and some modifications, we might be able to push that close to Visa scale. But if you start wanting to talk about going like beyond that to global scale, technology's not there yet. But we're progressing in that direction. Like even just recently, there was a great paper published by Benedict Boons, who's a PhD student at Stanford, on like RSA accumulator, cryptographic accumulators that can be used to build nodes without a UTXO set, which is a major scaling bottleneck. This is really kind of technical, but there are advanced cryptography and advanced technologies that can be used and deployed to remove these scaling bottlenecks that can allow us to scale while kind of remaining decentralized. So I don't think we know how to scale to global transaction volume today, but I think we've got an idea of at least potentially how we could maybe get there.
Okay, we know how to scale to global transaction volume. Blockstream is a company whose business model is to be a parasite on Bitcoin, and it doesn't understand the concept of not killing the host. Okay? Because if the transaction fees are high, that means that the economy is being destroyed. So you need transaction fees to be low so that there can be lots of commerce. Okay, so they're destroying the Bitcoin economy, and also this scarcity in the block size limit is completely imaginary. It is an arbitrary number that was inserted many years ago. So the real scarcity in the Bitcoin bandwidth is the computational capacity of the miners. Okay, so they have the incentive to increase capacity as much as they can, not to keep it limited to any given amount. Bitcoin does not become less valuable if there are fewer nodes on the network, because nodes don't add value to the network unless they're mining, okay? And there is no reason for there to be lots of miners, okay? The miners are the only group of people that can only be paid in Bitcoin. So they need Bitcoin to be valuable and useful. And no other group is like that.
Okay, so there was a lot of craziness that was just spoken by everyone. So first thing was that you were saying that Blockstream forced Vitalik off of Bitcoin,
No,
but
that's-
Ethereum was started before Blockstream was founded in early
Right.
2014.
Correct.
So the
Yes,
timeline
yes.
is mistaken.
Right.
Then it was said that we want high fees on layer 1, but although that happened in December 2017, I kind of think it will never happen again because the market has learned how to switch into altcoins, and you have seen the fees come down, you have seen the usage of Bitcoin come down. So the other thing is that Bitcoin transaction fees, although they're explicitly priced in crypto, in Satoshis per byte, they in practice are really priced in dollars because as the exchange rate goes up, it becomes more painful to pay a given amount of Satoshis as a transaction fee. So it's very correct when Roger Ver or someone says that fees became $30 per transaction or something. It's correct to price them in dollars. And people will not want to do that if there's an altcoin down the street that offers a better rate. And I don't think Lightning will improve on that substantially because Lightning itself needs channels, needs on-chain transactions to open and close the channels. And because it's slightly more inconvenient in a few ways because it's interactive. You have to be online to receive money and you have to sign with a hot wallet to receive money. And so maybe Lightning can kick up the total fees by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude by making people not care as much about the on-chain fees because each on-chain fee is doing the work of several off-chain fees. But in general, I think the fees will really not go up again. And so however much we might want layer 1 to be expensive, I think it may not be expensive, which is disturbing because the total transaction fees paid in the last 12 months was something like $70 million, which is not per year, which is not enough. Obviously, that's very little. That's something like 1/10,000th of the U.S. defense budget or something. So that's very small per year. To just pay that per year to just shut Bitcoin off with a constant campaign of 51% attacks. So then it was said that I think let's see, Dan, you said that the only nodes that matter are mining nodes, but that's not true because running a full node is the only way to know that you have been paid money. So when you use Bank of America or something, you log into Bank of America and you check and you see if you have money. And the only analogous thing you can do in crypto is run a full node. So it's simply not the case that you gain nothing if you are running a full node and not mining. You gain the ability to see whether or not you have been paid. And that is really the only way of gaining that. Although I did publish something about fraud proofs that try to make, if in SPV mode, try to make it so that you can sort of know that also. And a bunch of other crazy things were said, but I can't remember what they were, but they were really crazy.
Shaking hand in my peripheral.
No, running a full node is only good for you. What I meant is that you're not adding value to the network as a whole by running a full node. You're not doing anything for anybody else unless you make a block.
So I would disagree with that too. So let me give you an analogy here. Imagine the only people who are running full nodes are miners, which is basically what Daniel is arguing. No one else can validate those consensus rules other than the miners. So let's say the miners could band together and say, okay, instead of 12.5 Bitcoins per block, we're going to do 100 Bitcoins per block, that we're going to reward ourselves. Nobody else is going to be able to detect that without running full nodes, okay? And what happens is when other people do run those full nodes, it creates an incentive for miners to behave honestly. So consider that miners have to, in order to make money on mining, they have to sell their coins into the marketplace. So if they take their coins to an exchange and the exchange is running a full node and says, hey, wait a second, that came from a block that created 100 Bitcoins, I'm not going to accept that block, because my node tells me it's invalid, well, then there's no one those miners can sell their coins to. So if the miners know that if they change the rules, they're not going to have anyone to sell their coins to, then there's a huge incentive not to do any funny business like that. So the act of running a full node it contributes to the correct incentives on the network. Everyone doesn't need to run a full node to get this effect or this incentive, but you do need economically relevant participants checking the work of miners and not just trusting that the miners are not manipulating things.
Yes, you see, but Dan, the thing that you said, well, okay, that's good. It's good to clap for that, I think. But Dan, you said it doesn't matter if the number of full nodes, the full node count drops on the network, which I think is technically correct because the count of the full nodes is nonsense, and you could easily fake that by just making many nodes and then shutting them off, and so that's an irrelevant metric. But what is relevant is the cost of running the full node. And when the full node becomes harder to run, just because you need more hard drive space and more internet, but also because it's harder to run anonymously, that does affect you because now it's harder for you to figure out whether or not you've got money. So and the cost of a full node is exactly the thing that goes up when we have higher block size and these other things like that.
All right, I've got the microphone back and a page full of notes. First comment is a UASF, yeah? Just a reminder about that one. But blockchains are a radical experiment in decentralization, and that balance of power is so important, and so you absolutely need those nodes to balance out the miners, right? But a couple of things I want to mention is when I think of scaling, I think of it in 3 layers, right? You have network latency issues. I mean, the idea of trying to coordinate absolutely everyone's transaction with every node all around the globe just seems hideously inefficient to me, right? Like, why? Why would we do that when we have better ways? So, well, the one we always think of is transactions per second, right? That's very important. And then the third is blockchain bloat. And you can make lots of arguments about, computer disk size gets better and better, network speeds get better and better, but why go with that inefficient model, right? Why not do something more efficient that addresses all 3 of these situations if we can? Right? Let's go with the best, most efficient model we can come up with. All right, but then you talk about decentralization, right? And people have lots of concerns on the Lightning Network about will we get decentralization, right? Will we just have these giant Lightning hubs? And will that create even more opportunities for this censorship, right? Geez, where do we start with that one? So Lightning, you kind of need, there's a difficulty from getting here and there. You do need lots of people on that network and that very robust network to make it function the way in which we want it to function. I see that growing organically, like businesses picking it up here and there, people coming on and joining it. People worry about, it is much easier to run a Lightning node than it is to be a miner, right? And if we think about the possibility of someone taking over the network, like how do we protect that decentralization? To me, the best way to do that is to have a robust market which has low barriers to entry, right? If it's easier to run a Lightning node than it is to run a miner, you're likely to have, more robust market there. If you have these, a situation where you make it very expensive to be a miner on the network, where you have to have, amazing network speed, a super fast computer, a giant disk to store all this information on. You raise the barriers to entry to that market and make it more likely that someone can take that over, right? That's my concern there. Now, you talk specifically about Lightning, and people worry, well, you need all this liquidity to make these channels work, and so a Lightning node is going to have $100,000 worth of liquidity, but we have solutions for that too, right? There's really awesome things called like multi-route atomic payments on Lightning, where you can have payments that go through different channels with much smaller liquidity, and so I think that is very likely to solve that problem.
No, but I don't think anyone brought that up, right? Who brought that up? Everyone thinks that Lightning is sort of a good idea and worth a try. I think I was just saying that it can only increase fees to like $700 per transaction, because at a certain point, people would just prefer to go down the street and not use Lightning and use an altcoin payment for 2 cents or something.
I guess, Paul, ask you a question. I I take it your kind of scaling vision is like sidechain related, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So like you just
So confident in it that I don't even feel the need to convince anyone, but I'm happy to explain it.
So I know I just want to ask a question. So you're talking about like the cost of running nodes, which I agree the cost of running nodes is very important and optimizations are very important. But like how in that sidechain model would you get to, let's say, global transaction volume and still keep the cost of running a node down?
Yeah, that's an excellent question because that's exactly what it does not do. And in fact, I presented this at Scaling 3 in Milan, and I used this analogy of a pizza that's being sliced into smaller and smaller pieces, and the weight of the pizza doesn't change. But I won't explain it here. But the issue is that what sidechains do is they allow you to make this mistake or take this risk, rather, of running something with super, super, super high node cost. And so it lets sidechains let you basically send Bitcoin to different pieces of software. So the idea, and this is originally a Satoshi Nakamoto idea actually, this is like the fourth to last post that he made in December 2010 before he disappeared. This is in the quote where he says, users might get increasingly tyrannical about limiting the size of the chain. So if you've heard that quote, this is that post and you can look it up. He's talking about there being a small block main chain and then a merge mined larger chain for payments. And that is what I think is the best idea. Now running the larger node, that does have a high cost. So it achieves absolutely nothing but in those respects. But it does have the effect of everyone's not forced into the same boat. So some people can just only run, like Luke Jr. can only run the small nodes, but then Roger Ver, with his superior wealth and superior internet speeds in Japan, he can run a big node, and then everyone's happy because people just run whatever nodes they want, and it's like the software on your iPhone or your Android phone, where you just install the software that you want and you don't have to think about how or interact with other people. And so it does not do that. But if the sidechains are merge mined, all the fees go to the Bitcoin miners, and that does matter because Visa's revenues from operating fees alone are just from the transaction fees they charge. And this is just Visa, so this is just one company, but they're absolutely enormous. They're many orders of magnitude higher than the fees that Bitcoin currently collects, which I said in my previous comment, is probably the limit to how much we'll ever be able to collect on BTC because of the effective competition from altcoins. I would like to ask a question, which is how many people here run a Bitcoin full node? And I'll just say that I don't. I run Electrum in SPV mode, and I just think that's funny to people. I wonder if anyone here runs one. I don't. So if anyone runs a full node, then raise your hand or of a certain type of thing or something. Andreas does.
I just do for development purposes, really no other reason.
It's funny, he does. See, it's often topsy-turvy like this, where people say it's not important to run a node, but those are the people who run the node. Right. And then people like me say it's important to be able to run one, but I don't run one. So that's very often it's flipped like that. That's why I always ask. I think it's funny. Of course, I would probably run one if I was going to get paid like $50 million worth of Bitcoin. I would want to turn one on, yeah.
How many millions?
Yeah, we'll see everyone's reservation price on when they'll decide that it's worth it to run a node.
I don't really have that much to contribute. I keep thinking about the comparison between $70 million, right, in annual fees and just under $2 billion worth of fees off of the unbanked alternative financial products just in the States alone. And your point about Visa is well taken. But I'm learning lots of stuff up here, so it's great.
What matters is what makes Bitcoin more valuable. So I think that worrying about the cost of running a full node is just concern trolling. If Bitcoin is more valuable when nodes get more expensive, then nodes should be more expensive. And nobody who wants a cheap node should be able to say anything differently. It should be about value.
So I think so from listening to Bitcoin SV people, I don't know if Daniel can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the impression that I get is that their view is that Bitcoin is not or should not be a decentralized system, but rather only a competitive one. And there's a key difference there between competition and decentralization. So think of Bitcoin mining, you could have 2 miners and still call that a competitive system. I think it was like Rothbard kind of said the same thing about monopoly in the marketplace, that you can have Boeing and Airbus making commercial aircraft. There's only 2 of them, but it still could be competitive even with just 2. And I think the Bitcoin SV people is to kind of say, well, Bitcoin is just another thing in the market, and if it just shakes out that you have 2 miners, or even if you only have 1 miner, and it's just that miners open the competition, then even that would potentially be okay. Where I draw the line there, and where I think that Bitcoin is fundamentally different, is the goal of Bitcoin is to, as I see it, is not just to be another thing in the marketplace, but it's intended to have this property of censorship resistance. It's intended to be resistant to government control, and a system with like 2 miners, while you might still call that competitive, it's not resistant to government control. It's not resistant to censorship and what have you. I think the ideal system is as distributed as it possibly could be, so that it can't be taken over and it can't be controlled. If we didn't have to worry about governments, if we didn't have to worry about, crony banks and this sort of stuff, I think, just saying, whatever, however many miners we have, however many nodes we have, that's whatever it costs to run a node, that's all fine and dandy, who cares? But if the goal is to build something that is robust and resistant to censorship, then it's not just, whatever we have is what we have. We want as many as we possibly can have to distribute it across the entire system.
If you try to control miners, you're fighting value. Okay? You should never fight value, because you'll just lose. Bitcoin has a centrality contest, right? So the network does not have any central point, but as time goes on, there are different locations in the network that are better connected to everybody else in the network, and the miners are all competing to have the best position over time.
Well, 2 just really quick comments. It's very sort of silly that I spend all my day thinking and working on money technology, but yet hate thinking about money all the time, right? And so I hate this constant talk about value. I'm always thinking about utility, right? And I prefer that focus much better. But you keep talking about value, and I love what Chris said there, is that Bitcoin gets, if it loses its decentralization, it loses its value. So those really are the same thing there.
Yes, I actually think it's funny. I think both Chris and Daniel are right, and they didn't realize that they didn't contradict each other. But it's very common because it's very widespread belief in among the far right, the sort of Blockstream, Bitcoin Core, intelligentsia. They draw the similarity between running a full node and running a mining pool. And they carve out, they think it's the same, but I actually think they are opposites. And so I agree with Daniel that actually when mining becomes more difficult, it's like no one cares because the mining difficulty literally goes up all the time, and usually people just cheer and they think it's great. And then the UASF is another example where miners didn't want to do something and they're kind of forced to do it, and everyone, now that they're doing it, everyone's happier. So there's a sense in which you want mining to be as difficult as possible, but that does not mean that you do not want, you want running a node to be as easy as possible. And so they are in fact not necessarily the same, and I think they're actually different. And I do think that Daniel, the premise that you don't care about how expensive a node is cannot be true, because if a node costs infinitely much to run, then the network could never obtain new participants. And so you have to admit that it comes into play at some point, and then it's just a difference over magnitude, I think.
Okay, really quick, I just want to throw this question out.
Wait a minute, that's a silly argument. I'm sorry. That's just silly. The cost is going to be based on the real difficulty of putting together the resources to make a mining operation. It's not going to be infinite.
It has nothing to do with mining. This is just to see if you've been paid. But
whatever. But the point is that's a silly thing to say. It's not going to be infinite.
Silly thing to say was that it wouldn't matter how much it cost. So that's the silly thing is to say is it doesn't matter how much it costs, because it's basic extreme. Just take an extreme case and you see that it does matter actually. And if it's infinitely cheap to run a full node, you can see also that no one will be able to suppress the network because you can just summon new nodes everywhere, every day, and they'll always be.
What matters is the value of the coin, okay? And the cost of running a node is the servant to the value of the coin. Okay?
Yeah, but imagine that you cannot run a node, then the value of the coin must fall to zero.
Yeah, okay, but the main thing is the value of the coin. That's the whole point.
Yes, but this is a function of, this is one of the things that contributes to the value.
Right, but the only way that it matters is how it contributes to value. You shouldn't concern troll about the cost of running a node.
No, but it's not really concern trolling though, because as I just explained, if the node is too expensive, then people cannot join the network, and then they are vulnerable, as Chris was saying, they're vulnerable to fraud, and they'll find a difficult time using the network and figuring out if it's working for them or not.
Okay, you have not related those concern trolls to value.
I think it's also kind of interesting to bring in something Hannah said about like, and this is a question as much as a statement, value does have some element of utility in it, right? So I think it is interesting to think about some of the things that are being said here, right? About the nature of decentralization and the ease of using Lightning versus a node, or your point, Paul, that using a node should be easier.
Okay, so let me ask a quick question, guys. Okay, you have your hand up? Sorry? Go for it. He says that the end game has to be that the currency becomes money, that we might have differences in the notion of what value is, but our end game is for the currency to become money. That we understand what value is. And that we want that coin to be of value, and that's the only thing that matters. Okay, so I have a quick question, and this has to do with during the Bitcoin Cash split. Roger said something very interesting, and he said, miners do not want to be leaders. Miners have not been wanting to be leaders. Okay, sometimes you talk to someone from the BTC camp, and they say to themselves, they answer, well, miners did follow what the community wanted, right? If you talk to someone from the BCH camp, they also say, we use hash power, right? However it is, they use hash power to secure their chain. If you talk to the BSV camp, they would say, miners are supreme, right? So it seems as if the role of the miner is changing now, not in that it's changing differently, but in the sense that miners are beginning to discover a different position within the Bitcoin economy. Some are miner supremacists and say that pure proof of work will govern not just one chain, but all chains. Paul Storks is of the mind that he's giving more opportunity for miners to decide what is best. So this notion of miners as leaders, what do you guys think of this?
Miners are the only group that is only paid in Bitcoin.
I think in general, people have this weird fear of miners that has been used to justify paying consulting fees to certain people for their expert advice. There's a kind of, I don't know, racketeering going on. Miners have never done anything wrong, really, in the history of Bitcoin, in my opinion. They've just politely mined a block once per 10 minutes forever, and instead, everyone hates them. It's very funny. Anyone who wants to learn more about this, to your point, at Scaling 2, there was a miner panel, and that was in December of 2015. During the scaling, debate was really heating up, and it's clear from the miners' comments that we were totally overwhelmed and really had no idea what was going on, and they just wanted someone to tell them what to do. And it's kind of funny. It's better to watch the whole thing to really get the full experience, and it's a very neat thing. And I do think in general they do what the community wants them to do. No one, it was told to them that the community wanted larger blocks, and it was not until these futures markets came out, I think BitMEX first, which had this 85-15 split. And then miners sort of decided that they couldn't commit to SegWit 2x for more than 24 hours or something, and so that led to the failure of that thing. So I think miners really have never done anything but try their best to attempt to provide value for Bitcoin, and then they occasionally get confused or are misled, possibly by well-meaning people, but the miners seem very docile to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So from time to time, I've talked to miners, and their number one concern is we just want to make sure our blocks get accepted. That's really the only thing that they concern themselves with, is making sure they're not losing any blocks. So don't do anything that's going to cause us to lose any blocks. You know, if you want to make the consensus rules, don't do it in a way that's going to, harm, our investment in the mining equipment, maybe by causing a split or something like that.
Someone has a question? Yes? Yeah, we have 1 megabyte in BTC, yeah. He's asking if miners are being paid less in the BTC than they would have otherwise. Okay. Okay. Will the 1 megabyte limit reduce hash rate, and will that in turn reduce security since it's being hashed less?
Yeah, that question has been debated a lot for many years, and for a while it was thought that if you capped the supply, this would cause prices to go up, and so you'd get a kind of big, thick square of revenue. For those of you who remember your supply and demand graphs from Econ 101, if you took that, you get a big square. And other people said we should get rid of the limit so that we can they said all the fees will be low, and we're only going to have a little sliver along the bottom. So we need to get rid of that cap so that we have a really long rectangle sliver instead of a short rectangle sliver. And this point was debated between Peter Todd and Mike Kern in 2013. And I think it's still debated today because you had Greg Maxwell with the famous Pop of the Champagne email, heard around the world, that he was happy that fee pressure had emerged in December. But actually, as I expressed earlier in this panel, I think that it will reduce the hash rate ultimately, because I think that even the capping the supply will not necessarily lead to the fees going up. It would only do that if Bitcoin had a monopoly on its type of transactions. But now that Monero and stuff is out and Bitcoin Cash is out, as I said, the fees can only go up so high, $70 a transaction, before someone says, well, I just want to buy something on Silk Road or something, so I'm doing a little what I call round trip, where you start with fiat, you pay, and then the seller cashes out in fiat. So you're just going through the network. You're not hodling at any point. And so for those people, they are not going to pay $70 when they could go down to Bitcoin Cash down the street and pay nothing. So I do think that this view of getting that square to emerge probably is not in the cards. And so I think that the hash rate will be reduced as a result of the block size cap.
I think they're not. No chain is operating kind of based on that supply and demand economics. So if you think about it, in every market, there's going to be some price that maximizes your revenue as a business. If you go beyond that price, you're going to sell less, and you're not going to be maximizing revenue. If you lower your price, you're going to bring in less revenue. You're not going to be maximizing. So there's a equilibrium point. And there's no way you can code a blockchain to adjust the supply to hit that, right? So
no, it's very easy. In fact, you just change it. That's quite easy. You just change you randomly change the block size by like 1% in one direction each block, and then you see if the equilibrium price changed by 1%.
Well,
you just basic elasticity calculation. So
okay.
That is actually pretty easy.
So I think,
but it doesn't really matter, because I think the demand for blockchain space is just now super competitive, so it's just going to be low. and it will just be kind of whatever transaction fees.
So I
you
think
can
my
grab.
point is that centrally planning the block size, if your goal is to maximize revenue to the miners, I'm not even sure that that's the goal we want, right? There's a marketing strategy that companies employ when you're bootstrapping a new product where you need network effect. You hold the price really low to bootstrap it and get as many users on as possible. Maybe that's the optimal strategy for Bitcoin. That's not adapted in that either. So, but if the goal is to maximize revenue to the miner, centrally planning the block size is not going to do it. You might be getting too little revenue. You might be, you know, so.
No, but I don't think that's centrally planning at all. It's just entrepreneur selling X goods for Y amount, and then he just tinkers with that over time. That's not
No,
central
I
planning.
just meant like capping at like 1 megabyte.
Well,
and saying like
it is centrally planning unless it's one miner with 51% who is enforcing the 1% block size change. But if there's more miners than that, then they can produce a block of any size that they want. Just because somebody says you change it by 1% doesn't mean they're going to do that.
There was a proposal called BIP 100 that would have allowed miners to kind of vote to set the block size. And I kind of felt like that was from Jeff Garzik. I felt like that one may at least have had a chance to setting the block size optimal, because if you assumed that, which is a really bad assumption, but if like the miners had like marketing professionals and finance professionals working for them, they could figure out what that optimal block size is and kind of vote for that. But I really doubt that that's how miners operate. That's part of it, yeah. But
That was the
revenue
original
was not-
July 2010 purpose. It is possible, you do need 51% to enforce the changes, but they would do that because they can and because it's more profitable. So you would be easily able to do this block size optimization revenue scheme. And in fact, it's probably inevitable because miners can do it and it maximizes their revenue. But of course now they don't care yet, because still the fees are at least an order of magnitude smaller than the 12.5 that they get just for doing nothing. So
Okay, so I have one last question, one for each of y'all. So 2020 is coming, May is coming. The block reward is going to halve once again. What's BTC's? What's BTC's plan? What's Bitcoin Cash's plan? What's BSV's plan? And Paul Storks, what's your plan? Sure, you can get a question.
I'll speak at the end.
Okay, you'll at the end. You'll wrap it up. I'll let Christina wrap it up.
I don't know that there exactly is a plan. I mean, we all know this is coming, right? And this is, well forecast, and I think everyone's adjusted their expectations accordingly because we all expect it to happen. So I don't think there is a specific plan.
The Lightning Network, is that?
I'm just talking about for Bitcoin,
Right.
and for the halving.
What's the end goal for the Lightning Network to prepare for that?
I don't think that'll affect what's going on with the Lightning Network much. The Lightning Network just needs a lot of development, and it needs that, organic growth and new people coming on and using it. And so I don't think that's going to be very dramatically affected by the next halving, because I think that is built into all the miners' expectations, all those big players. Like, that's very, very predictable. It's not surprising in any fashion.
Yeah. I think the original kind of idea behind Bitcoin was that the fees were or the block reward as it declines is gonna have to be replaced by increasing transaction volume to make up for that, or at least, we just got done talking about maximizing fee revenue, but that's one way, is through more volume. I think that is what most people in Bitcoin Cash would like to see, but that's out of our control. It's whether people use it or not. So yeah, the halving, we already have issues where we have very little mining power compared to BTC. So, a halving on that could, the halving is going to happen around the same time it happens for them. So our ratio may remain the same. But I think when I mentioned Avalanche before, these are kind of ideas that we're playing around with to try to harden the chain and increase the security. Because one of the things that you can do from a security perspective is increase the cost of doing an attack. And so right now the cost is just the cost to get 51% hashing power. We could do things where you don't just need to get 51% hashing power, but you need to hold on to it for 3 months. That's going to have a lot higher cost than it would otherwise. So Is that the ultimate strategy? I don't know. These are things that we're kind of experimenting with, playing around with, and kind of seeing what direction we want to go.
Scale as rapidly as possible and kill off all the other coins so nobody else can use them.
Yeah, what's everyone's plan? I mean, in BTC, I think there is a plan for Schnorr in the summer, soft fork for like Taproot and Graftroot and some of these other things. I don't know about, I mean, I think it's hard for BCH and BSV because the network effects of money are so important. And when you don't have transaction replay, you're kind of basically saying, you know, trains leaving the station, you're either with us or you're against us. So you kind of need to win very quickly, I think. But neither of them, the market cap is so low and so few people transact that I think just the stigma is just going to slowly wind both of those projects down, and then they will probably just die off, which is a shame because BTC is certainly not being run optimally, but that's just kind of the way I feel. I mean, I'm going to launch, or I'm going to try to finish my own drive chain project, which lets you send Bitcoin from BTC to other pieces of software, and that should just obviate this entire discussion, because if you want to use something like Bitcoin SV, you could just opt into using that without having a different token. So I plan on trying to do that this year and to launch the prediction market project this year. And I would like to do it on BTC, but there are a bunch of prima donnas over there, so I have no idea like what the deal is with like peer review or the BIP process, if it even still works, or if miners even still activate soft forks on Bitcoin Core. I don't even know, but it seems like one is going to be tried for the late summer, autumn, so I'll probably try to, that was what I was alluding to, and I mentioned it in my talk in autumn, so I'll probably try to catch a rider on that one, and we'll see. But yeah, this is pretty crazy in general, so, but there's never a dull moment, so it's interesting, I guess.
I only have to say that I reckon by 2020, the number of people who even know what the halving is will have massively increased, and I bet that the mainstream financial architecture will start to even care about what it is that we're talking about up here.
Beautiful.
Yeah, what about Abra, right? Like that kind of came out of nowhere that they're doing tons of crazy stuff now. Like I think we'll see more stuff like that where just stuff will just emerge that will be sleeping, and then it will be really cool. Or not, I don't know, but you know, just a lot of people work on stuff and they just don't tell you about it, and then it comes out. So that's a neat idea.
Atomic swap.
A lot of cause for optimism, I think, actually.
So since we have all these wonderful people here, can we please give them a hand? They came from all over the world. And I mean, this is a gift to all of us. This is going to be a gift for the whole crypto space once this reaches, YouTube or whatever. But look, this is such a special panel here that if you guys want, we can do a part 2 here at Anarchapulco. We'll figure out where it's going to be. Maybe we'll figure out a nice place in one of these restaurants that's quiet. We'll bring cameras. We'll do a part 2 of this, and we'll film it for everyone. And if you want details on this, go to Telegram /Anarchapulco. I will post, once we figure things out regarding the logistics, it will be #Bitcoin. Sounds good? That's how we're going to communicate for part 2 of this panel. If everyone agrees, then we do it again. And just keep going deeper. Let's get deeper into all this.
And can I say thank you to Raphael for moderating, and thank you to you
Thank
guys
you.
who hung out all the way to the end. I reckon you're probably more hungry than we are.
Anarchapulco, it's so hype, I'm trying to tell ya. This the event of the year and best vacation ever. Ron Carter, Jeffrey Tucker, just to name a few. Get your tickets, you don't wanna miss it. You should roll through, talking politics to health and self-improvement to investing. So many things, not one thing. Learn how to live life unchained, yeah. 4 days vibing on the beach, time to connect. All about growth, way more than a conference. This is Anarchapulco, yeah. Let's go.
You ain't seen nothing yet.